You're listening to The Victory Session with Stephen K. Bannon, powered by Victory Film Group.
This is Stephen K. Bannon, Victory Sessions, 790 AM Talk Radio, KABC. I'm here with our very special guest, Todd Palin, husband of Governor Sarah Palin. Todd, I want to talk about the film that I worked on. Very proud to have written and directed. The Undefeated. The Undefeated is coming out in DVD this Tuesday in Walmart and Target, Best Buy throughout the country. Be front of the store display. The reason I wanted to have you on is that a lot of my buddies on the guys, either political writers or guys out there, have been telling me that as they've gone around and people have been shouting questions at you and Governor Palin, you continue to say, watch The Undefeated. Watch The Undefeated. Tell me, why do you think, why has the movie, you were someone that was there at the time, why has it moved you, or what do you see about the film that you tell people, just, I need you to watch it, go watch it?
Well, how you doing, Steve?
Doing good, sir.
Talk about The Undefeated. I didn't really know what to expect because there's so much material. I mean, Sarah did a lot, and to put it all in a 2-hour film was going to be a challenge. So I didn't know what to expect, and there's so much to cover with a little bit of time. So watching the film, I was just blown away on how you put it together. The interviews, what really stuck out in my mind as far as interviewing part of her administration, other Alaskans. I thought you did an excellent job in that direction.
Let me ask you, Alaska, let's go back in time. When Governor Palin decided to run, and she went up against a very tough political system and a very tough, entrenched kind of Republican Party at the time. But what was Alaska like back in last mid-decade? What did she actually face? I mean, what was kind of the mood of the state at the time?
Well, we have to turn the clock back to her mayor days when she won her first term as mayor. There was a bunch of resistance because the good old boys, they didn't want to change the system that they had in place. And so I remember her first city council meetings, the first 2 rows of the council chambers were just full of attorneys because they had a big recall effort going against her. And so when she got reelected, hands down, 75%.
By the way, it was a complete blowout, a landslide victory.
It was huge. And then she decided to run for lieutenant governor.
Let me stop. Let's go back to Wasilla, because her plan there was very basic. It was infrastructure. If we want this community to thrive, we got to have we got to build roads. We have to get sewers. We have to do all that. It was kind of very basic, but it met with a certain amount of resistance. Right. This resistance was overwhelming of people that wanted to spend the money on projects that look in hindsight to be pretty marginal. Correct.
Very correct. I mean, they had, new city hall laid out and, all these other big plans. But, Sarah was all about, roads and sewer and making it a business-friendly environment. The less government, the better. And it was a huge success because during those years, Wasilla was, one of the fastest-growing communities in the state and, maybe even the nation at that time.
And then what... So she's always been a little, not just unconventional, but quite anti-establishment, particularly where the establishments kind of have vested interest, right? Where they're kind of these vested interests. What inspired her to really take on, which seemed to be not just a long shot, but a Herculean task of running against in a primary a sitting Republican governor? What were the events that inspired her to do that?
Well, just experience, when you're sitting on city council as a city council member and, the powers to be just expect you to go over there and vote with them and this and that. And she says, well, this is not right. I'm not voting, the way they want me to vote. And I'm here for the people. I represent the people, not the buddy system. So, that carried on through her career. And, when she ran for lieutenant governor, she was outspent 5-1. But to us, it was a victory. She lost by just a couple percentage points, but it really elevated her in front of Alaskans all across the state.
When she ran for, we have in the film, and by the way, The Undefeated will be in DVD this Tuesday in Walmart, Target, Best Buy, stores throughout the country. My guest is Todd Palin, husband of Governor Palin, who is the topic of The Undefeated. you announced that. I think we've got the footage, and actually the film we showed that you announced for governor in your living room of your home. She was a long shot at that time, right? She had, I mean, and you're saying she was outspent 5-1 for lieutenant governor. It seemed almost that odds in the primary race that she ran against Governor Murkowski, correct?
Correct, and you know, it's one thing to run against the sitting Republican governor in a Republican primary, and so we knew there was going to be a huge challenge, but Alaskans were disappointed in the direction that he was taking the state, and they wanted that change, and you know, she offered that up, and the voters decided that they, you know, chose her for the primary, and then going up against two-term, well-liked Tony Knowles, you know, was a big obstacle to overcome, but you know, she beat him as well.
The Marty Rutherford in the Magnificent Seven. What was this whole thing with Murkowski when they had this kind of mass resignation of people that worked in the Department of Natural Resources over certain contract negotiations that were going on with the big oil companies? How did that play thematically into Governor Palin's primary race against Murkowski?
Well, I think, you know, his administration was going hat in hand to the producers, going, how can we make this work? What do we need to you know, put this package together? While Alaskans, you know, they wanted to get their fair share. And you know, on the slope, when you just have a couple of big oil companies that basically have a monopoly of everything, and you know, she wanted to open it up for competition. And you know, with Marty, with all of her experience dealing with oil and gas issues in the state for many years, you know, she felt that was the best direction to go as well.
How surprised were you guys on election night? Not against Knowles, but when you actually defeated then Governor Murkowski. How big, I mean, for you and Governor Palin, how big a surprise or how big a shock was that? Because, by the way, he does not get defeated. I think in a three-way race, you won 51-16, right? I mean, it was a blowout of epic proportions.
I mean, we were happy, but we knew that, you know, the next big challenge was around the corner. But we had, you know, a lot of grassroots effort. You know, she traveled all over the state, and she had good feedback wherever she went, listened to the people, and I think, you know, Alaskans wanted a change, and that's why they chose her.
Now, after you defeated Governor Tony Knowles, when Governor Palin actually you did something that was radically different than anybody. You actually had the swearing-in ceremony up in Fairbanks, where it had always been done in Juneau. What inspired her to do that?
Well, you know, Alaska's a young state. We were approaching our 50th anniversary of statehood, and you know, Fairbanks is where the Constitution was signed, and she wanted to, you know, bring us back to our history, our roots, and I felt it was a brilliant move, because getting another city involved in an inauguration like that was just an incredible. Fairbanks really welcomed the opportunity with open arms, but it was fantastic.
You know, it's quite interesting when we showed in the film her inaugural speech that she gave that day. It was, I mean, she was quite upfront that she was there to make, you know, what we call sudden and relentless reform. She was not coming in as a caretaker governor. She had run on a platform of reform against crony capitalism, against the permanent political class, and she laid it out that she was there to make change. How was that speech received?
Well, the speech was awesome, and it was received by the Alaskans that were there. You know, independent, Democrat, and Republican. I think you interviewed one of the House representatives who was a Democrat and who felt the speech was very good, very Alaskan speech, saying stuff like "hold my feet to the fire" and "I'm here to serve you." People were kind of blown away because they hadn't heard that before.
No, it was very refreshing. Todd, when Governor Palin came into Alaska, her focus was to basically restructure a lot of the way that the oil industry held its resources developed its resources and monetized its resources. So there was more of a shared enterprise with the citizens of the state. Correct? That's basically what her overall driving motive force as governor was. Correct?
Well, she just wanted an open playing field. I mean, you had smaller companies that owned leases on the slope, but they couldn't afford to spend the money and develop their lease because certain companies owned the pipeline and tariffs were too high. But she just wanted to open up the competition, make sure that the direction of her administration was it's business. When I sit on the other side of the table, I'm representing Alaskans, and we understand that you're doing your job representing your shareholders.
Yeah, in other words, yes, we understand what you're trying to accomplish. We're not trying to denigrate that, but I'm on this side of the football, and it's a adversarial process, and we're both trying to work for the good of both, and that's the process that she undertook. Correct?
Correct. I mean, for years we had a broken tax structure with Alaskans own the resource, they go develop it. We're in partnership, and for years, because we can't be compared to most states in the lower 48, we have to be compared to other countries. And so we're always kind of like on the bottom of what we receive for being the owner of the resource. And so, we talk about ACES, when they went in there and tried to get a better royalty tax plan, but also incentivize exploration and development. It's a very complicated system. But, they're able to pass the new tax structure in 35 days because her administration was so transparent and open. The Democrat lawmakers were very impressed being able to have a commissioner at their doorstep if they had questions. I mean, 35 days to pass major legislation is quite the accomplishment.
You know what? When I've shown this film all over the country, and to many, in the media and liberal audiences, they don't know the story. What really blows them away is the fact of she brought the people of Alaska together for a program on both ACES and also the gas pipeline and even the development of places like Point Thompson. But when she actually had to have legislation passed, she did it in a way that was very sophisticated. She realized that the way to really get this done, you can't pass these on simple majorities. You need real overwhelming passage of these. And she did this, which is, I think, lost on people today, but the financial crisis, she actually went out and explained her legislative program on these specific issues at these town halls all throughout these little, she would go to these, whether it was Nome and all these, I guess Nome's not that small, but relative to Alaska, but all throughout the state, and really make presentations on what are quite complicated, whether it's the ACES, whether it's tax structure, whether it is about development, whether it's about the natural gas pipeline. She would go out and explain to the citizenry what the benefits were to the companies and what the benefits were to them. And that's when these things passed. They were virtually unanimous, or, with only one or two. It was incredible, and I think it really impressed people, the level of sophistication that the governor had, understanding what you have to do to basically get a citizenry to kind of back the legislation to give you these type of votes.
Well, when you watch The Undefeated and you listen to Marty Rutherford and others, when Marty, explains how they worked, the first few years of Governor Palin's leadership, they worked around the clock. And I could tell you, they worked around the clock because they weren't going to present something that was going to fail. It was too important. So that's why they made sure everything was, tested and calculated, and they were there to answer the questions. And if a question wasn't being able to answer, then they'd go out and make sure that the individual got the information that they needed.
What the natural gas pipeline was such a radical way to kind of think through a project that really had not gotten off the dime, I think, in 30 or 40 years, right? It had been talked about. The people had tried to do things, but had never accomplished it. She really rethought how you kind of bifurcate this and make everybody work to their strengths. How was that received as she was pushing that through? Because that's clearly the most, I think, complicated and most controversial of all the measures that she had.
Well, at the end of the day, when a GA was passed, it was 59-1. So that's tells you right there where lawmakers, the direction that they wanted to go at that time. And I mean, 59-1, major legislation, Alaska Gas Line Inducement Act. After years and years of talking about gas, now they've got legislation and law on the books, and had their 20 must-haves. This is what Alaskans need, and it was a huge step.
Alaska today, I think, is I think someone we checked, and I think it's sitting on $12 billion in cash, and that is twofold. Number one is the ACEs and the way she restructured the tax revenue system. The second is that Governor Palin, actually in a time of surplus, went in and really challenged the legislature over both the operating budget and the capital budget. Can you explain those fights? Because it's very different when you see someone like a Chris Christie or a governor of a state that is technically insolvent, that has to make these cuts or is forced to make these cuts and really doesn't have an alternative. For a governor to go in and cut during times of surplus must have been incredibly difficult.
Well, her first year in office, her first legislative session, GIA was the main focus. And, it's such a game with lawmakers when you ask them, what are your priorities? You have to go back to your local towns and cities and get their priorities. You would seem that would be the common sense approach, but it doesn't work that way. Everybody throws in their pet projects. Nobody ever presents that priority list, and they just kind of, we'll see which project doesn't get vetoed. But when she got out the veto pen, it really upset a lot of folks because they didn't expect that. But time and time again, her administration asked for, what are your priorities? Here's my priorities, let's work together. And it never happened. And so when she, had one of the largest veto cuts in state history, I think it was close to $300 million, it really upset a lot of folks.
When you came back, one of the more controversial parts of the Undefeated, and I think one that I'm particularly proud of, that I think we handled and told it in a very straightforward manner, just laying out the facts, was when the governor came back from the campaign. And by the way, when she was selected, I think what's amazing was the approval ratings were just phenomenal. I mean, the approval ratings in the mid to high 80s, and this was all because of how she had comported herself as governor. The campaign, and we just had on before Ron Susskind of Confidence Men wrote the book, but he also talked about the financial implosion in the fall of 2008 when Governor Palin was running as Senator McCain's vice president. When you guys returned to Alaska post the campaign, you had essentially left in August, and you came back right afterwards in December, but it was a very changed political environment. What had changed in those 90 days?
Well, the campaign was 66 days, and there's other situations that kind of led up to August 28th. I mean, she had a great relationship with both sides of the aisle, approval ratings through the roof. It was just unbelievable. GIA, ACES, ethics reform, it was just all lining out. But when, Senator McCain selected her and then she was on the ticket, there was a lot of excitement. But what blows me away is that, here you go hand in hand, kind of being an independent-minded governor, not hard to the right or not hard to the left. But I just couldn't believe how people who had a great working relationship with her, it was like a switch. These lawmakers, Democrat lawmakers, and some Republican lawmakers, we had huge success, and they's like, oh, she can't tie her shoes. And right. I just like, are you kidding me?
Right.
And you guys had so much success, and then now she's on a presidential ticket, and you don't even know the other guy, but you guys have a successful working relationship, and then you're going to tell her she can't even tie her shoes.
Todd, when the governor returned, not only was it a totally changed political environment, it seems to me that the Republican establishment, who had never really embraced the governor because she was an agent of change, and she was an existential threat to the way the good old boy system worked in Juneau. And in addition, the Democrats clearly looked like they were getting guidance from the national, or at least from the national Democratic leadership, not to support this woman because this woman is potentially incredibly popular. When you got back basically in December, the governor resigned in July. Walk through your guys as a couple and as a team, because you guys are clearly a team. The thinking that brought you to that momentous decision.
The July 09 decision, or?
Yes, the July 09. Yeah.
I mean, I could talk for hours on, Obama's relationship with Alaska, because Pete Rouse, who was his chief of staff as, Senator Obama, and so he's got strong ties to Alaska. So when she, was selected to be on the ticket with Senator McCain, I mean, all the Democrats up here, they pretty much, turned that switch against her. But coming back to Alaska, I mean, it was a whole different world. Like I was telling early in the other segment, working with people side by side, then you come back and they don't even know you. And then, watching her go to work in handcuffs is because, as soon as we came back, ethics.
Now, and just to put this in perspective, when she left in August, now you returned 66 days later in late November, December, but when she had left, not only were the ratings high, I believe, and I didn't have time to put this in the film, but they had done a questionnaire. The newspaper did a questionnaire to the legislators, and they had said it was the most successful legislative session they had ever had. They believed in the history of Alaska, that more had been accomplished in a more positive, working together, nonpartisan manner, with these monumental things passed with overwhelming majorities, and the people really came together. That was in August. You come back, so it's the highest ratings Gallup had ever had for any sitting governor. The legislators are on record as saying the most successful legislative session possibly in the history of the state. So these are not just average things. These are so far over the mean, right? You come back 66 days later or 70 days later, and it's just a radically transformed environment, correct?
Oh, it's just unbelievable. Just ethic complaint after ethic complaint, and watching her go to work in handcuffs because she's spending so much time going through
these ethics complaints are just by either bloggers or people. There's a way to kick up the dust in Alaska that because of a wrinkle in state law that it's easy to file these things, and they get to just be a whole exercise in and of themselves, correct?
And then every move that her administration made or planned to make on a national level, she was getting criticized for every step that she tried to move the state in, and so that was harming the state because a lot of the mainstream media wanted to shed a bad light on Sarah and on Alaska.
One of the things that's very providential, though, is after that July decision, is that in hindsight, particularly given the historic victory of the Tea Party in the election of November 2010, that if Governor Palin, if it hadn't happened in that kind of timing, Governor Palin really became, and the Tea Party does not have a leader, but it certainly had several people who kind of were the spiritual drivers of it. And that's where I first actually never met Governor Palin, but became really acquainted with her. I was making these films about the rise of the financial collapse of the country and the rise of the Tea Party. I noticed this leader, this woman that came out and not just connected with the audience, but spoke in a very plain-spoken but sophisticated way about limited government and the future of the country. When did you start to see that? Because no elected official in the Republican Party would really stand with the Tea Party. It was really a collection of just citizens coming to the council. When did you see Governor Palin really start to say that this movement really could be something special?
She was involved early on. She's not one to test the wind, and she just started gathering information, and she's like, I'm getting behind the Tea Party. I'm going to help whoever I can. It's a great movement. Her interest, and this came up in the speech that was given several weeks ago over Labor Day in Iowa. This thing of crony capitalism. If you go back and look at her record as a leader and as a politician, whether it was at Wasilla on city council, or whether it was as mayor, or whether it was her
run for the governorship, or whether it was the way she comported herself and governed as governor, and then her involvement in the Tea Party. She has always had a very special place for what I call populism, or representing the little guy, representing the middle class and the working class against vested interests, particularly when vested interests are not working on the side of the people. Have you noticed that that's been a constant theme in her political life?
Oh, there's no question. She's not afraid to go against the grain and rub shoulders with people that are in politics for a certain reason, and the reason not being the people that they're representing. And so, I mean, she's for the people, never wanted to have a lot of strings attached to her, if any. And so that really rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, especially here in Alaska, where you have a group that the movers and shakers that always have the phone number of the governor, and they pretty much didn't have that when she was governor.
Is that the way Alaska has been? Is that there's a political or financial elite that feels very tied to either the big natural resource companies or big oil that feel that they have to be dialed into a governor and that they want special privileges and be treated in a certain way?
Well, I think you could divide that by two, where oil industry, and then maybe some of the other movers and shakers of the state, but they both go hand in hand.
Todd, when the film starts off, you guys are you have a small commercial fishing vessel, and you and Governor Palin are actually running that as a commercial business. I have heard we were blessed to have Chuck Heath on the other night. He says that his attitude about you changed when he had to work for you as on the fishing boat. That you are known up there as a guy that's very focused when it comes to fishing. Can you tell us about that?
Well, I was blessed to grow up in Bristol Bay, where my family's generation of commercial fishermen. So as a child, 8, 9 years old, I'm out there on the beach helping my grandparents or mother, and just been in the fishing industry all my life. So when you start out that young, you know that the fish are only going to be here for a few weeks, so you have to work around the clock and work as hard as possible. But we still continue to fish, and we're passing it on to our kids. Our oldest son is running it now, but it's a great way to grow up. Nothing. Hard work is healthy, positive.
A couple things. Number, Track had actually served in combat in Iraq and is now returned. He had one combat tour over there, or was it two?
One combat.
One combat tour, and he's back now, and he's actually taken over the family's fishing business, correct?
Pretty much the last 2 years. This summer he had it all to himself. I didn't even make it over there.
I take it that is, if you do that, I take it Track did that with you when he was a young man growing up then, right?
All the kids, Sarah's family, through different years, they've been over fishing with us because we like to let everybody experience commercial fishing out there with us. And, Chuck was out there a year. He had a good time. He's a hard worker.
The film starts off, when we start off, it's Exxon Valdez. You actually are part Native Alaskan, correct? What is? Can you give us something to talk about your family's background?
Well, I'm a Native descendant. My mom's Native, my grandmother's Native, and they grew up in Bristol Bay fishing, and we talk about Exxon Valdez storing all the oil and around the native villages in that area. Is pretty sad because it just devastated fishing. So this was March of '89, and in the summer of '88 I fished late into the season because I didn't have a very good year, but the price of fish at that time, the summer of '88, I was getting $2.35 a pound cash, and then the following summer I think the price dropped to 75 cents a pound, even though we're several hundred miles away from Exxon Valdez.
Wow.
There was just that excuse of all of Alaska salmon was tainted. So that was pretty hard to deal with, and then it took several years to build that price back up.
Well, and Exxon Valdez wasn't exactly forthcoming with helping out, right? It's one of the things I think inspired Governor Palin, that the Exxon Valdez, first off, it decimated the fishing, what wasn't actually polluted, guys like yourself that may not have been affected by pollution directly, had the market absolutely implode because of people just didn't want to say, oh, Alaskan salmon, I can't touch that. It's got oil in it, right?
No, I mean these are fishing communities. I mean they've been fishing communities for many years, and through many generations, and so it's a huge shock. But and that's your livelihood. But Exxon Valdez's long lawsuits for over 20 years, and the sad part is that you had over 6,000 defendants that passed away and never saw the end of the case.
I mean, 6,000 people that were affected that somehow were tied up in the litigation, but had basically died before anything that came to fruition with Exxon.
That's correct.
That's terrible. Now? How did you get? You actually moved to Wasilla. How old were you when you actually moved there?
We moved to Wasilla my senior year in high school. So coming from a small school at that time, I was living in interior Alaska, Glen Allen, and went from a real small school to a larger school. So it was a big step for me, but I was pretty gifted basketball player, so I was really looking forward to playing in a bigger school with more competition. Now,
is what Chuck said, and Chuck is Governor Palin's brother, Chuck Heath. He was saying that you were not just a great team sports player like basketball, but that it's shortly thereafter that you really became involved in the Iron Dog. Can you describe what the Iron Dog is? Because the way he described it to our audience the other night was absolutely unbelievable about the difficulty, the length of this, the time of year you do it. Can you just tell our audience what exactly is the Iron Dog?
Well, I grew up on snow machines. My dad told me that if I could start that snow machine in the yard, then I could drive it. So I'd get all my neighbor buddies, kids around, and then we'd start it and we'd drive it. So
how old were I taking?
Probably 6 or 7 years old. But when you talk about Alaska, most people are familiar with the Iditarod. And that goes from Anchorage to Nome on dog sled, dog team. The old Serum Run. And so back in 1984, there's a couple guys that wanted to participate, follow that trail on snow machines. So from 84 to 93, it was, Anchorage to Nome, and then they'd alternate years. And then in 1993, they made it a 2,000-mile race where you go from Anchorage to Nome and back. So it's 2,274 miles. On snow machines, there's two snow machines.
2,200 miles would be basically going from Maine almost to New Mexico, right? The United States, I think, is roughly 3,000 miles across, 26 or something, but it's almost going the breadth of the United States, correct? Roughly.
Correct.
And you're doing this not on a summer's day. This would be it's in February. It's
in February, but you have two snow machines, two racers. You have mandatory safety gear. I think so far this year we have 20, 25 teams signed up. But it's one of those Alaskan events that really doesn't get too much national attention. In the last few years, we've had some film crews. National Geographic was out last year filming the Iron Dog pilots, because we'll have. Some teams have airplane support that could land at the airports at some of the villages. But I started this race in '93, and I've been hooked ever since. That's my, what a guy does for a week of vacation.
But you have to train. I mean, because you're alternating with a driving partner because you're basically going 24/7. I take it there is some downtime to be able to sleep.
No, you're driving with your partner. You're out there in the middle of nowhere. That's why there's two of you on two snow machines. I mean, so you've got a partner for safety. I mean, but you're a team.
Now, what Chuck was telling us, it's in the dead of night. It's often 30 or 40 below zero. You often can't see the moose or what's ever in front of you. How dangerous is this? Chuck told us a story that you actually hit a semi-submerged 55-gallon drum and broke your arm. Was it 2 years ago?
Yeah, it was a few years ago, and as many times as I've raced this, I've wrecked a few, but that was the worst wreck. And most guys, you try not to wreck. You try not to drive, out of control. but things happen.
And so this thing is quite. What's the worst accident that's happened on the Iron Dog?
We've been lucky. I mean, guys breaking legs, and I think one guy broke his hip. But no, we're out in the elements. 55, 60 below, driving down the Yukon River, doing 90, 95, 100 miles an hour. It gets a little nippy, but it's a great event. Every year the event is growing, getting more sponsors. We've had a women's team finish it, but there's a wide range of participants from 18 years old all the way up into their late 60s, so it's a lot of fun.
Todd, tell us about Track. Track, he went into the military and he came back, and was his love for fishing that had him take over the business? I mean, what was his motivation? He loved it so much, or he saw it as a business opportunity?
Well, Track grew up, fishing on the boat, as a young kid, and he was quite the hockey player, so sometimes hockey would get into fishing. But you graduate from high school, which he spent, the last few months of his senior year out in Michigan playing hockey. But graduated, he was working, going to college, and then decided
he went to this junior hockey system that potentially you could turn pro. Is that
well, it was just midget AAA,
right.
But
right.
On a little higher scale competition than what we could offer here in Alaska. But we do have some teams that play in that same league. But you graduate from high school, you're going to college, you're working, and then he decided, and he's always talked about joining the military, and then he enlisted and went out and went boot camp and everything, and did his time in Iraq. And I'm sure while you're away from home, you think about the stuff that you miss. And,
yes.
He was thinking about being on a boat, picking fish and making money. And so when he came home, he was just really looking forward to getting back on the boat and taking fish and being with the guys and making some money.
Well, listen, you got to be very proud of him. I know that anybody in that generation, it's tough to volunteer. It's particularly tough to volunteer when you're in combat. Todd, listen, thank you very much for joining us tonight. I really appreciate it as the filmmaker when I hear guys calling me from the country and saying that hey, Todd Palin's answer to any question about the governor is go watch The Undefeated. You can't get a better advertisement than that, and we're very excited about the film coming out into DVD this week. And we want to thank you, Chuck Heath, your brother-in-law, Governor Palin's brother, and telling us the stories about the Iron Dog. We had so many of our viewers call up and say, or email me and say, we got to hear Todd tell us some stories on that. It's been great for you to share it with us tonight. We really appreciate you coming on the show.
Well, Steve, thanks for having me. I can't thank you enough for producing The Undefeated and the people that were involved, the Alaskans that were involved in The Undefeated. They did an outstanding job because it's so much about Alaska, and just to be able to showcase our state and what our state could offer. The best jobs plan today would be to open up Anwar. There's so much there, 3 square miles, so much oil. And I just thank you for shining a light on our state and showing some of Sarah's record. You know what,
Todd, before we wrap up here, I think it's very important is that it was obviously a team effort, and I think that was very important of the governor to pull that team together. And one of the things is that when people ask me about Governor Palin, what I found out is that the one thing I found out is that how modest and humble she is. When we went back and looked for footage of her really talking about herself and her record, it's very rare to find, and that's one of the pleasures of doing the film is that she led a team. I mean, she was a leader of a group that came together for the betterment of the state. It pulled people together. Clearly, the results were overwhelming public support, legislative support, and really moved the ball down the field for the good of Alaska. So it was I think it was a very unique period of time, and I think that's why people. I think we had Adnan Gardardash on here from the New York Times, who wrote that great article about Governor Palin's speech in Iowa, and he said, "Look, as more people, look at her record, they're increasingly impressed when you really drill down on it. No pun intended. You see someone of incredible accomplishment, and that's one of the reasons that inspired me to do the film. That the more time you spend, looking at Governor Palin's record, you realize that she was not Caribou Barbie, but a very engaged political leader who led a team of very motivated people to great ends. And that's, I think, what it is when people see the film and they come away and they say, "Boy, I never knew that about her," and I'm really impressed. So it was a great pleasure to make it, and a great honor and one of the highlights of so far of getting to meet you and get to know you and the governor better.
Yeah, well, Con Bundy, Rick Halford, Meg Stapleton, Marty Rutherford, Tom Irwin, Tom Van Fine, and all the others that you had on the show. I mean, just Alaskans, and Alaskans at heart. And, with her leadership, I mean, they just buckled down, and it was business. And when you move forward and you want to make change, you're going to piss people off, but Sarah doesn't care.
That's why she's the undefeated. Todd Palin, thank you very much for being on the Victory Sessions. Greatly appreciated, sir.
Thank you much, Steve.
Bye.